Over the last few weeks, we have painted a huge amount of Grimdark scenery for Hice City Zorpazorp, and each week I've said, don't paint it yet, just build a bit more and you can do it all in one massive batch. Well, that batch has gotten bigger and bigger and more intimidating, and if I don't rip this band-aid now, I don't think I ever will. We're going to be painting 5 different buildings today, looking at a whole range of urban city finishes from muted colours to sparkly metallics, imperial structures to orc scrap heaps, and use a whole range of techniques and materials to get some amazing weathered, grimy, grimdark as scenery. Whether you want to paint a city yourself or just watch my descent into madness, this is the video for you. But up first, it's time to chat about today's sponsor. Now, you guys know I'm a sucker for epic battles on epic scenery, and Raid Shadow Legends has that in spades, with a whole host of awesome champions waging war across Teleria. Use my QR code or links down below to download Raid yourself to your mobile phone or PC while I tell you more about it. Orcs always get a bad rap in fantasy, but in Raid, they're almost the good guys. While they were created by the Dark Lord Sirioth, they have been absolutely trashed by the Bannerlords and the High Elves and are now pretty much fighting for survival. This is my orc war boss Galak, and he loves to crack some heads. I really love the backdrops behind the gameplay most of all. There are some awesome designs that would look epic as tabletop scenery. This month, Raid has released a huge new Doom Tower update with 2 huge new bosses, as well as the new Super Raid feature, which is perfect for zooming up new players. And if you want an even bigger head start, all you have to do is hit the link in the description or scan the QR code right here. New players will get an epic hero Chonaru, who is amazing in the Doom Tower, 200k silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and the 1 ancient shard so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get in game. Look at this cool champion you'll get for free. You'll find all your extra rewards here in the inbox, but only for the next 30 days. And it's that easy. Just click the link in the description and I'll see you in the game. Now, before we start, I have a confession to make. I have never used an airbrush. In fact, I've actively avoided them and find them utterly terrifying, but screw painting this by hand. Now, before all you hand brush viewers bail on us, stop, wait, don't go yet. Every single technique we'll look at today can be done with either a normal brush or an airbrush, and I'll mention options for both. In many cases, the airbrush will simply just speed things up or get a slightly different type of finish, so stay tuned no matter your weapon of choice. The lovely guys down at Scale Modelling Supplies right here in Australia sent me this lovely airbrush kit to try out with some goodies, and I couldn't be happier to have a local company nearby with a great supply of spare parts. But before we put her through her paces, it's time to prime our city. To create the perfect foundation across our buildings, I built up a zenithal prime using rattle cans, beginning with an all-over coverage with a dark grey, then 2 top-down highlights, first with a light grey and then a final pass with white. As my buildings are fully modular, I sprayed the greys in component parts to ensure all the detail inside and out was gorgeously accented before whacking all the pieces together and repeating the light grey and moving on to the white. This ensures that the lighting profile is consistent and creates a realistic foundation. Each building we look at today will show off some different techniques to establish the foundation of our schemes before we level up the paint jobs with some insane grimdark weathering in part 2. This first structure, the Imperial remnant of our soon-to-be orc-infested Manufactorum, will be a lovely 2-toned red and grey because, you know, Mars. First off, starting with a base coat of red all over the exterior wall panels. I applied this through the airbrush, blending 3 drops of Vallejo Air red, 2 drops of Hull red, and 5 drops of thinner to get the perfect Mechanicum red and the right amount of opacity to my paint that the Zenithal Prime creates some subtle changes of hue. If you want some amazing advice on starting out, I've linked 2 fantastic videos by 2 good mates down below, Ollie from Broadsword Wargaming and Scotty from Miniac. Thanks boys, you guys helped me break through the noob pain barrier. By building up repeated lighter passes, I was able to not only control the saturation of the red, but also get a nice natural variation in tone across the walls that gives the layer so much more presence than just a flat brush-on base coat. I am loving this tool so far. You could just as easily apply a thinned red by brush, but it will take a lot longer and be nowhere near as smooth. I also applied this red to the Manufactorum wall pieces in the upper orc structures, which we'll come back and look at in a future part of this series. Next, I need to create a quick black base coat on all of the metallic details, the grills, the pipes, the cabling, and traditionally I would just spend a bunch of time doing this with a brush. But to push myself, I grabbed some Vallejo Air Black, swapped in the smaller 0.2 needle size for fine control, and started blasting.
I started blasting.
In true noob form, I definitely got quite a bit of overspray here and there, but of course this is black, so it just ended up totally working as a bit of extra shadows, especially as this is all going to be grimed up to Grimdark down the track. To really bring that detail to life, I gave it a quick dry brush of lead belcher. Scratch that, the damn thing dried out. Oh, what a surprise, bolt gun metal from 1875 is still wet though. If you spend a bit of time on these two steps, really picking out many of the wonderful industrial details as you can, it really pays dividends. Dry brushing over the black gives all the metallics a really contrasty look that is a fantastic start for the grimy aesthetic, and it will look amazing after the final layer, a big old black wash, but not just any black wash, we're using enamels, baby. Enamels are seriously the most incredible washes. They flow really well, they create amazing graduation of tone, and if you varnish them beforehand, you can reactivate them and pull them back by applying neat thinner. For this grimy terrain, I haven't bothered with a varnish, we're just going straight down over the other layers, so I made sure it wasn't too dark as we can't step backwards, and I slathered it everywhere. Suddenly, the metallics are grimy and delicious, the reds have deepened to a lovely blood red. You can see now why I initially applied a very bright red, and the interior walls and the floors are simply the grey zenithal from the prime, and they're now a fantastic industrial mid-tone grey. And boom, we have an incredibly simple yet striking two-tone scheme that will be a fantastic foundation for our Grimdark Manufactorum. One criticism of our first method is that I don't feel like the zenithal ended up doing a lot of work. The graduation underneath the red ended up being very subtle, so I decided to take my mate Danny from 3D Printed Tabletop's advice and experiment with some Citadel contrast paints through the airbrush on our second building, the Basilicanum. I just had to go for that classic sandy brown to bone look, so I grabbed myself some Skeleton Horde and threw it into the airbrush. I done goofed straight off the bat and diluted Skeleton Horde with contrast medium because I'm so used to thinning down my contrast for brushwork, but this of course only changes the pigment ratio and doesn't change the adhesion properties or the viscosity, so I ended up jamming my airbrush 5 times before realizing I needed to use airbrush thinner, because, you know, I'm using an airbrush, to quote Scotty, Lockie, you dingus. Once I'd thinned it down with about a 3:2 contrast to thinner ratio with a drop or two of flow improver, she was going on like a dream, and the high pigment ratio of the contrast is working to perfection. This Skeleton Horde is effectively creating a bone filter, retaining all of the graduation of the zenithal prime and simply tinting the greys to light brown. Perfection. I did all the interior walls first and then built the building and applied the exterior walls as a solid piece. As I noticed on the Manufactorum, I'd accidentally created some weird blends between the levels, which I'll have to fix later. Same as before, you could apply this with a brush, but the finish is going to be super streaky. Contrast through the airbrush do not behave like contrast straight out of the pot, because they dry as soon as they hit the model and don't have time for all that contrasty pooling. So if you're using a brush, lots of arduous thin passes will be the way. Next up, I base coated all the metallic elements in Canoptek alloy because, you know, I can't seem to make a video without using it. I opted for a solid base coat here rather than an overbrush on black for a different metallic surface that we can really heavily mess with when we come to our advanced weathering. Same as before, the more you pick out, the more detail you accent. Now for the grey floor tiles, I grabbed some acrylic black wash made from diluted Liquitex black ink. Now usually I use the black wash recipe by Jez from Blackmagic Craft, but the last time I got super lazy and didn't add all the extra stuff and it worked terribly. But in doing so, I discovered a weird shortcut. Without the flow aid and the matte varnish leaving basically just ink and water, all the black pigment settles weirdly on flat surfaces, which looks shocking at first, but when you give them an overbrush, it looks like amazing grimy concrete. Hell yeah for shortcuts. To grime up my metallics, I grabbed my Tamiya enamel black wash and slathered that on, and now they've got some lovely definition. Then to really give the whole piece a lift up to the bone tones, I mixed up a nice light beige and gave all the walls a big old dry brush. This accents all the details even further and creates a lovely highlight. Applying with a cheap makeup brush is always the way to go with these subtle dry brushes. And there we have an absolutely classic Games Workshop city building scheme, and I do really love it. To mix things up, you could go even further further accenting the window frames in metallics or another color, but I love the idea that the wall pieces come off some futuristic STC 3D printer as one massive piece and get blasted in primer as a sub-assembly, or at least that's my justification for not being asked. Stepping back in time from Basilicanum to Basilica Administratum, we've got our first of the old school GW kits, and before we do any painting, we're going to do a bit of sneaky building. I absolutely loved the verticality that the elevator has added to this board, so I really wanted to lean into that and add some more playable up and down elements, so I got my super fast printy boy James Gaywood to smash me out some stairs and handrails and started modifying them to suit the height of my levels. I added both an internal and external stairwell for the first and second levels, and I love the way this has changed the whole dynamic of the building, which has so much floor space but didn't have a great level of interactivity. Now I can have models walk right up to the main walkway height without doing any imaginary teleporting. Over to the priming bench, and I wanted this lad to have a really nice grey to white finish, so his zenithal had a much heavier final white pass, and then it was time to throw down some acrylic black wash on our floor tiles. This worked in the exact same way, but got an even crazier pattern due to the tighter weave of the tile grid, but with another light grey dry brush, we've got a lovely dirty floor tile base. Then I grabbed some Retributor armor and started adding some gold details. I was initially pretty restrained with this, but since finishing the pieces, I think I'll go back and pick out a whole bunch more before moving on to the weathering, because I really love the gold-white look. As a general rule with these older pieces, I'm treating all the crazy skulls and architraves as if they're one solid cast piece from plasteel, and not painting every single skull. Not only because it takes forever, but I also think it looks terrible. Trust me, Teenage Lockie knows that pain. Then we're falling back on our old favourite, the black enamel wash. This wasn't as dark as the Manufactorum, as enamel always stains the whole surface, and I eventually want to lighten this back up, but it's just fantastic for emphasising the detail in these walls and building up the layers of dirt. A lot of these enamels spill onto the floor tiles too, but that doesn't matter, it just looks like extra uneven grime. Then once that had completely dried, I gave the wall several dry brushes with light white to bring them back up a touch, and we've got another building done. I'm not as happy with this guy as the first two. I think before we begin weathering, I'll add more gold and maybe darken the floor tiles with another wash, as I couldn't get the walls as white as I originally planned, so the contrast between those two layers isn't as extreme as I wanted, but she'll do for now. Our final building for today is the almighty lift-bearing Sanctum Imperialis, and after the lack of diversity of the Administratum, I really wanted to go back to a two-tone scheme, but still make use of the prime and keep it quite monochromatic. When I primed this building, I used very little white to keep it nice and dark, and then to complement that, I brought in some Vallejo Air blue-grey, nice and thin, and applied some light passes to the floorboards to give them a dark blue-grey tint, and then fell so much in love with the colour combination, I picked out every single vertical beam in the structure as well. I was absolutely shocked with how fast and easy this process was. I'm a total noob, as I've said, and with a little practice, I got barely any overspray. The key here was lowering the pressure of the airbrush so I could get closer without splattering the paint. I then picked out a whole bunch of gold detailing again with Retributor armor, and then some of the silver for all the exposed rebars poking out of the damaged sections, as well as the more industrial details up near the elevator housing. Then it was time to finish the floorboards. The acrylic black wash went down just as dirty as before, and then I mixed up a dark blue-grey for the dry brushed highlight to really accent all of the details. Then to finish off our walls, I gave it a heavy wash, again with enamel black, applying wash to all the interior and exterior walls, building up several passes on the metallics, and then gave the entire building, both the blue and grey elements, a further dry brush in light grey. This tied the two tones together nicely while still keeping the two colour elements present, as well as lifting the grey walls and adding some nice accent to the raised details, like all of the bolts and weathered edges. And there we have the beginnings of our Grimdark City paint schemes. We've established the color profiles and done the bulk legwork on the foundations, and next time we'll be going Grimdark crazy. We've got advanced weathering techniques with enamels and oils, rust and grime effects, battle damage, and of course, rubble. These neat and clean ruins will finally look like a war zone, not to mention all of the roads and walkways. If you guys enjoyed this, please leave me a like and comment below any cool suggestions you have for future building schemes, and if you're as psyched to see some battle reports on these bad boys as I am, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A huge shout out to these amazing folks who were a huge part of this journey. I couldn't do this without you guys, especially these amazing Mega Zorptrons. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one. Lockie